What if every reflection you've ever seen wasn't really you, but something waiting for the right moment to switch places? The thought slithered into my mind the moment I crossed the rusted gate of the abandoned carnival. The air smelled of rotten rain, a metallic tang that made my stomach churn. The Ferris wheel loomed in the distance, skeletal and silent, its cars swaying slightly as if moved by an invisible hand. I shivered, not from the cold, but from anticipation. No one had dared enter the mirror house for decades, and now, standing on the cracked wooden planks that led to its entrance, I felt a thrill of terror mingled with curiosity, a dangerous cocktail I couldn't resist. The doorway yawned like a black mouth, mirrors lining the walls of the corridor beyond, cracked and dust-streaked. My flashlight beam bounced across them, illuminating my own face in splintered fragments. At first, the reflections seemed ordinary, even a little comical. My jawline stretched in odd directions, my eyes flickered in mismatched colors, and the faint light made my skin appear ghostly pale. I laughed nervously. It had to be my imagination, I told myself. Funhouse mirrors always distorted. That's all. That's all they were. But then I noticed something. My reflection blinked once, then smirked. A faint, deliberate curl of the lips that I had not made. I froze, staring. My heart drummed in my chest like a jackhammer. The air thickened around me, heavy, almost breathing. I turned my head slightly, scanning the hall, and the smirk remained, fixed on my reflection as though it were mocking me. I forced myself to step forward, rationalizing it as a trick of light. But with every step, the reflections grew more precise, eerily human in movements that weren't mine. They weren't copies, they were anticipations, rehearsing gestures I hadn't yet made. The first room opened abruptly, larger than I expected, the ceiling high and mirrors lining every wall, floor, and even the ceiling itself. I felt trapped, as if I had walked into an endless hall of glass. My steps echoed unnaturally, bouncing in ways that didn't match my movements. And then I noticed them, not just my reflection, but the others. They lingered just behind the glass, not fully visible at first, but their outlines distorted and wrong, smiles too wide, eyes glinting with intelligence and hunger. One reflection tilted its head, just a fraction, and my blood ran cold. That tilt, it mimicked curiosity I hadn't yet felt. I stumbled backward, heart racing, but the mirrors seemed to stretch infinitely in every direction, corridors folding into themselves in impossible angles. Each reflection shifted subtly when I turned, as though each had its own agenda, waiting for the moment I'd let my guard down. I whispered my own name, my voice trembling. Is someone there? Nothing but the echo, distorted and mocking. But then, movement. A reflection in the corner, where there had been none before, stepped slightly forward. Not a normal step. Too deliberate, too purposeful. And it smiled. Panic surged. I turned to run, but every mirror behind me now held a version of myself I didn't recognize. One crouched low with predatory intent, one grinned with sharp teeth that weren't mine, one stared with hollow, desperate eyes. Their presence pressed in, almost tactile, a suffocating awareness that I was no longer alone in the house. The floorboards creaked underfoot, but the echoes suggested dozens of steps, many more than my own. Whispers began to fill the room, low at first, unintelligible, then slowly coalescing into words I could almost understand. Step closer, come here, join us. I froze, cold sweat running down my spine. Every instinct screamed to leave, but the doorway had vanished. Or perhaps the hall had changed, reshaping itself with every panicked heartbeat. The mirrors were no longer passive surfaces, they were portals, windows into a world where something just like me, but wrong, waited. The reflection that had first smirked was now fully stepping forward in the glass, movement fluid, confident, alive. Its eyes held a glint of malevolence that I couldn't shake, and in that instant, I realized with bone-deep terror, the reflections weren't just observing. They were waiting. Waiting for the exact moment to step out. The air grew colder, thicker, and the whispers swelled into a cacophony of voices. They spoke in unison, yet each carried a distinct timbre, some mocking, some pleading, some screaming. The reflection closest to me grinned wider, tilting its head. And then, impossibly, it blinked, slowly, deliberately, and stepped forward. A cold, tangible pressure against the glass pushed toward me. My body froze, lungs seized, and I could feel the impossible thought striking like lightning: if it can step out, then I could be trapped in there, forever. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, and in the blink of an eye, the hallway behind me dissolved into endless mirrored corridors, each one filled with countless twisted versions of myself. I had no idea where I was. The air whispered promises of safety, but I knew better. One thing was certain: the mirror house didn't just reflect, you didn't just see yourself there. You became visible to it, and once it noticed you, it never forgot. I could hear it breathing now, or maybe it was just me. But the reflection nearest to me, the one stepping closer, grinned with a confidence I couldn't match. And then it spoke. Not with my voice, but with mine, just a shade slower, just a shade more sinister. "It's your turn." I froze, my body rooted to the spot, as the first reflection stepped out completely from the glass. Its skin was pale but unnervingly lifelike, hair falling in uneven strands around a face that was mine, yet not mine. Its eyes glimmered with a strange intelligence, sharp and calculating, like it had been watching, learning, waiting for this moment. It tilted its head and smiled, a slow, deliberate curl of lips that was more predator than human. A cold chill slithered up my spine, and I realized with sinking dread, there was no turning back now. The hallway around me shifted. Mirrors folded into impossible angles, creating corridors that should not exist. The reflections multiplied and advanced, stepping out in synchronized, terrifying precision. Each one moved with a grace that I could not replicate, their footsteps silent on the wooden floor as if the house itself absorbed their weight. I tried to run, but the hallways elongated, bending in ways that made my sense of direction meaningless. Every turn led me back to where I had started, only the reflections were closer now, pressing against the surfaces of the remaining mirrors, their eyes unblinking, watching, waiting. A whisper echoed through the corridor, faint at first, then growing louder. It was my own voice, distorted, drawn out, layered with a tone of mockery I did not recognize. "Come closer," it hissed, "come closer, we've been waiting." My pulse hammered in my ears as I staggered, trying to find a wall or a door that led out. But every wall was mirrored. Every reflection was another me, grinning, frowning, snarling, and moving just slightly differently than I could. It was impossible to tell where reality ended and reflection began. I spotted a flicker of movement in one of the mirrors at the far end of the hallway, a shadow that wasn't quite aligned with my own. My heart seized. That shadow advanced, stepping out from the glass entirely. Its fingers brushed against the air in front of it, as though testing the boundary between reflection and reality. I noticed the others now, some crouched low, some stalked with predatory stillness, and some tilted their heads in silent, mocking amusement. It was as if the house itself had come alive, and the reflections were the creatures, the inhabitants, and the hunters all at once. I tried shouting, my voice bouncing off the glass in chaotic echoes that didn't match my words. "Stop! Go back!" The reflections didn't obey, they didn't flinch. One of them mirrored me perfectly for a heartbeat, then grinned wider than possible, stepping closer with deliberate, taunting pace. I could hear my own breathing amplified, distorted, coming from every corner, every mirror, every hidden crack. My limbs trembled with exhaustion and terror, yet I could not stop moving, could not stop turning, could not stop fleeing from my own doubles. The whispers intensified, overlapping into a cacophony of voices that clawed at my mind. Each one spoke with a different intent, some promising safety, others threatening pain, others mocking every step I took. My own reflection, well, the one pretending to be me, tilted its head slowly, watching as I panicked, its smile stretching unnaturally wide. Then it whispered, in perfect sync with my thoughts, "It's too late. You belong to us now." I stumbled into a larger room, a hall that seemed to stretch into infinity. The mirrors here were taller, full-length, framed with ornate carvings of faces twisted in anguish and laughter. Every mirror was alive, shimmering subtly, as though the reflections were breathing behind the glass. The first reflection that had stepped out blocked the doorway behind me, while others emerged silently from every mirror along the walls. I was surrounded. I couldn't move forward, couldn't go back. Every reflection was closer than it should have been, encroaching like a tide, yet frozen in the eerie grace of predatory patience. Panic clawed at my chest. My flashlight fell from my trembling hands, clattering to the floor and illuminating the mirrors in harsh, jagged beams. The reflections paused for only a fraction, then moved with inhuman speed, converging. I turned to run, but the floor seemed to ripple, warping beneath my feet. The walls of mirrors shifted like liquid, forming new angles, new corridors, trapping me in a labyrinth that twisted and folded endlessly. It wasn't just a house anymore, it was alive, and it was hunting me. A sharp, icy sensation pricked my neck as one of the reflections leaned impossibly close, its lips brushing the air near my ear. Its smile widened, showing teeth that were just slightly too long, too sharp, too human. "You can't escape. You are ours now. Step aside, or step in." Its words were a lure, a promise of inevitability. Behind it, more of me, or what should have been me, advanced with silent steps, hands outstretched, faces glowing faintly in the dim, fractured light. My mind raced. Every story I had ever heard about the funhouse, every warning about the mirror house, none of it prepared me for this. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was existential dread. I wasn't facing monsters. I was facing myself, every hidden, twisted, angry, desperate part of me given life. And they didn't just want to scare me. They wanted to replace me. I spun around, searching frantically for a way out, and my gaze fell upon a single mirror at the center of the hall. Unlike the others, it was clear, pristine, and framed in dark wood carved with unrecognizable symbols. It didn't reflect the room. Instead, it showed me, standing still, calm, staring directly back. My pulse quickened. Was that me? Or was it another one? A shiver ran through my spine as I realized the horrifying truth. Every reflection here was a predator, but that mirror might be the final trap. The reflections at my back surged forward, moving faster now, their eyes glowing with an unholy light. I stumbled, chest heaving, and for the first time, the weight of inevitability hit me. The house didn't just want to scare me. It wanted me gone, replaced by something that had been waiting my entire life to step out. And as I ran toward the pristine mirror, the whispers crescendoed into a single, terrifying phrase, repeated by every reflection simultaneously. "Step inside, or become us." The pristine mirror loomed ahead, impossibly tall and dark-framed, its surface gleaming in a way that seemed alive, pulsating with a faint, sinister light. I stumbled toward it, adrenaline screaming through my veins, but the reflections were relentless. They surged like water behind me, a relentless tide of distorted faces, grinning mouths, and eyes that gleamed with a predatory hunger. I could hear my own panicked breathing, but it didn't belong entirely to me. Somehow, the reflections' whispers had invaded my mind, whispering doubts, fears, and dark promises that made my chest tighten with terror. I reached the mirror, my trembling hand extending toward it, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. The reflections surrounding me froze, their eyes fixed, jaws twitching, waiting. I dared to glance into the mirror, and what I saw made my stomach drop. The reflection was perfectly calm, unlike me. It didn't just mimic my movements, it anticipated them, matching my breathing and posture, yet with a confidence I didn't feel. Its eyes were darker, colder, and as I stared, I realized the horrifying truth. It wasn't my reflection. It was waiting for me to step through so it could step out. A sudden crash made me spin around. One of the reflections had broken free completely, leaping toward me with inhuman speed. Its hands clawed at my shoulders, fingernails scraping across bone and skin, and I screamed, twisting violently to break free. Pain shot through my back as I stumbled across the warped floorboards, the house groaning as though alive. The mirrors themselves seemed to pulse and ripple with energy, their surfaces stretching, bending, swallowing fragments of light, and reflecting versions of me I hadn't recognized before. Some snarled, some laughed, some cried silently, all moving in ways that defied physics and sanity. I ran, barely noticing the labyrinth shifting around me. Doorways appeared and vanished, hallways doubled back on themselves, and mirrors multiplied, creating endless corridors that trapped me in a world where angles and distance no longer made sense. My footsteps echoed against the glass, yet they sounded like dozens of footsteps, dozens of panicked voices repeating my terror. Every reflection that had not yet fully stepped out pressed against the glass, straining, testing, waiting for a moment of weakness. Then, a chilling whisper broke through the cacophony. It was soft at first, almost gentle, yet unmistakably familiar. "You can't leave. You never belonged here." The words slithered into my mind, insinuating themselves like ice into my veins. I stumbled and fell, my hands skidding across the slick wooden floor, and when I looked up, the reflections had multiplied further. They weren't just standing, they were crawling down walls, emerging from mirrors on the ceiling, climbing over each other to reach me. Their mouths twisted into unnatural grins, and their eyes shone with a malice that made me recoil. I tried to fight back, swinging my fists, but my blows passed through thin air where a reflection had only just moved aside, and when my hand collided with glass, it shattered with a scream of its own, sending shards flying across the warped hall. I barely had time to dodge before another reflection stepped out from the fragmented surface, its body bending and twisting in ways no human could survive. Its teeth glinted as it lunged at me, and I felt the searing pain as it grazed my arm, leaving scratches that burned as if branded by fire. The hallways continued to shift, folding upon themselves in impossible loops. I ran, panting, every instinct screaming to escape, but the funhouse had no exit. Every corridor led to another room lined with mirrors, every reflection slightly different, slightly more menacing. Some of them mimicked my every move with a grotesque precision, while others acted entirely independently, stalking me with calculated patience. Their whispers had grown louder now, forming a chorus of malice and anticipation. I stumbled into a room where the mirrors were taller than any building, reflecting not just me but endless versions of the hall itself. The reflections inside these mirrors were not just copies, they were hunters. One stepped out with impossible speed, while another emerged, their form bending unnaturally, their movements jerky and wrong, yet fluid in some horrifyingly precise way. I realized then that every reflection I had seen was practicing, testing, learning, preparing to replace me. I backed away toward what I thought was a doorway, but the reflection closest to me mirrored my panic, matching my every flinch, until it moved just a fraction faster. Its hand shot out, cold and firm, gripping my wrist. I screamed, twisting violently to break free, but the grip was unyielding. Its face, my face, tilted in that same mocking expression I had seen at the very start. "Step closer," it whispered, perfectly synchronized with my own thoughts, "or stay, forever." In that instant, I understood with suffocating clarity, the mirror house didn't just distort reality. It didn't just trap you. It consumed you, replacing your body and essence with the reflection that had learned, observed, and waited for its moment. The terror was not just seeing yourself in another form, it was knowing that form could become you, and there would be nothing left of your original self. I stumbled backward again, desperate, chest heaving, heart hammering against ribs that felt too small for the terror within. And then I caught sight of it, a small, faintly glowing line in the corner of the hall. It looked like an exit, a door, or a crack in reality itself. Hope surged, but immediately I felt the cold hand of inevitability. The reflections had noticed. They advanced faster, moving with synchronization I could never anticipate, their smiles wider, their eyes brighter, their hunger palpable. And as I bolted toward the faint line of light, the whispers crescendoed into one horrifying command, all voices unified. "Step into the light, or be left behind." The line of light shimmered ahead, fragile and flickering, like a promise of escape too delicate to trust. I sprinted toward it, heart pounding, lungs burning, yet every instinct screamed that the reflections were gaining ground. Their whispers had escalated into a cacophony of voices layered over one another, each one a distorted echo of my own, repeating fears I hadn't even admitted to myself. "You can't leave. You're already ours. You always belonged here." I clutched my head as if to physically block them, but their presence was everywhere, penetrating my mind, insinuating doubts, twisting memories, turning my own past against me. The light expanded into a doorway, or at least what resembled one, but stepping closer revealed that the funhouse had no concept of normal geometry. The walls twisted inward, angles folded impossibly, and reflections overlapped one another in ways that defied comprehension. And then I saw them, versions of myself, not bound to mirrors, not confined to walls. Some crouched in shadows, others sat silently in corners, all watching me with expressions that were at once familiar and terrifyingly alien. They weren't smiling, they were waiting. Patient. Calculating. They didn't speak, but their presence pressed into my chest, making it difficult to breathe. I realized with a sickening clarity that each of these versions had made a choice I had never made, or maybe I had, in some fragment of reality I didn't remember. One of them reached out a hand toward me, almost pleading, but the fingers were impossibly long, joints bending in ways that should have been wrong. I recoiled, stumbling backward as the hallway behind me twisted, folding over itself, trapping me further. The reflections I had seen before, the ones actively hunting, were advancing, faster now, merging with their shadows until every angle was filled with distorted versions of myself, grinning, snarling, staring with eyes that weren't quite human. I scrambled toward the light, tripping over warped floorboards, and glimpsed a mirror that reflected a version of myself I didn't recognize, calm, serene, untouched by fear. It didn't move, but it watched, as if judging me. I realized then that the calm figure wasn't just observing, it was planning. Every reflection that had stepped out, every alternate self in the shadows, was part of a hierarchy, each learning, adapting, waiting for the exact moment to claim my place. My pulse accelerated, and the light ahead seemed farther away than ever, stretching into impossibility, a cruel trick of the house's architecture. Suddenly, the reflections lunged simultaneously. One grabbed my ankle, another brushed my shoulder, a third slashed at my chest, all moving in eerie synchronization. Pain shot through me, sharp and sudden, and the light ahead flickered as if reacting to my fear. I screamed, twisting violently to free myself, and in that instant, a horrifying thought crystallized: they weren't trying to kill me. They wanted something far worse, they wanted me to become one of them. They wanted me trapped, erased, replaced by the reflection that had observed me most closely, the one that had learned every tick, every fear, every weakness. I bolted through the shifting hallways, the mirrors bending, twisting, and warping around me. Every reflection I passed seemed to stretch, elongate, and reach further, clawing for me even through their glass surfaces. Whispers overlapped, forming words that sounded like my own, distorted and malicious: step into the light, or stay behind forever, we are you, and you are us. The chorus grew louder, and I felt the air thicken, pressing down on me like water in deep seas. My breaths came in shallow, desperate gasps, each one echoing into multiple versions of myself that crowded the halls. Then, abruptly, I stumbled into a room that defied explanation. The mirrors here were not reflective, they were windows. Through them, I saw infinite rooms, each containing a version of myself living a life I had never lived. In one, I sat at a desk, writing calmly as if the terror of the mirror house had never existed. In another, I screamed silently, trapped behind glass, twisting in horror as reflections moved freely around me. And then it hit me: the reflections were not just in this house. They were scattered across realities, each one learning, waiting, preparing to step out into any world where I existed. A cold realization gripped me: the mirror house didn't just trap people. It replicated them, perfected them, and trained them until they were ready to step out, replacing the original entirely. And as I looked back at the hallway from which I had come, I saw a version of myself emerging from the shadows, perfectly calm, perfectly human, but not me. Its eyes met mine, and in that instant, I understood: if I failed to escape, if I faltered, I would be trapped behind the glass, and this version, the reflection, would take my place in the outside world. Panic surged anew. I turned and ran toward the faint glow that promised escape, but the reflections had anticipated this. They blocked every route, advancing with fluid, impossible speed. The whispers crescendoed, layered over one another until they became a single, deafening command. There is no escape. There is no reality outside the glass. You are ours. And in the corner of my eye, I saw it, the first reflection that had fully stepped out at the start. It was smiling wider now, teeth just slightly too long, eyes gleaming with predatory delight. And then, impossibly, it whispered my name. Choose, or be replaced. I ran blindly, the warped floorboards stretching beneath my feet like some living thing, bending, folding, and twisting in impossible directions. The air was thick, damp, and heavy, carrying a metallic tang that burned my nostrils. Behind me, I could hear the soft, deliberate footsteps of the reflections, myself, but not myself, moving in perfect synchronization. They didn't just follow, they stalked. Every sound they made, every breath they took, was calculated to mirror and anticipate mine, to push me further into panic. I could feel their presence crawling along my spine, a cold, living weight that threatened to crush me. Then the hallway split. I turned left instinctively, but as I ran, the space behind me seemed to bend and fold, swallowing the path I had just fled. It was no longer a corridor but a labyrinth, a place where physics refused to exist. Mirrors now covered the floor, reflecting the ceiling, which in turn reflected the floor again, creating an endless loop that made me feel dizzy and nauseous. The reflections were everywhere. Some had fully stepped out, others lingered behind the glass, hands pressing against the surface, mouths twisting in smiles that were impossibly wide. I realized I couldn't simply outrun them. A flash of movement to my right drew my attention. One reflection, faster than I could comprehend, lunged toward me with a precision that was almost surgical. Its fingers grazed my shoulder, and pain shot through me, sharp and fiery. I yelped and twisted, barely avoiding its grasp, and it hissed, a sound that was part human, part something inhuman. You can't escape yourself, it whispered, perfectly in sync with my own thoughts, and my stomach churned with nausea at the realization that this entity, this version of me, knew me better than I knew myself. I stumbled into a room that seemed impossibly vast. Mirrors lined every wall, ceiling, and floor, reflecting infinite copies of me in countless variations, some terrified, some calm, some grinning with the same predatory smile as the first reflection that had stepped out. The sheer number of selves pressed in on my mind, a suffocating, dizzying sensation. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears, my vision swimming as I tried to navigate the impossible geometry. Every mirror contained a version of me, each one watching, waiting, evaluating. I realized with dawning horror that the mirror house didn't just trap people, it studied them, perfected them, created alternatives designed to replace the original entirely. Suddenly, the calm version of myself appeared, stepping out of a mirror I hadn't noticed before. It moved with a grace I couldn't hope to match, each step precise and deliberate. Its eyes were dark, cold, intelligent, and as it approached, I understood the horrifying truth: it wasn't hunting me to kill me. It was hunting me to replace me. Every reflection that had fully stepped out, every shadow lurking just behind the glass, had one goal: claim my place in the outside world while I remained trapped behind the mirrors, a permanent display in the endless gallery of the mirror house. I backed away, heart hammering, seeking any possible exit, any crack, any line of light that might lead out. But the hallways were folding over themselves, doubling back in ways that made escape impossible. Every mirror reflected not just my current self but memories, fears, and possible futures. In one reflection, I was screaming silently, trapped behind glass as the reflections walked freely in the world outside. In another, I was calm, almost serene, accepting my fate. And each reflection moved subtly, hinting that it could step out at any moment, replacing me entirely. The reflections began to advance in unison, moving with terrifying synchronization. One reached out from the ceiling, another emerged from the floor, sliding across surfaces as if gravity obeyed them alone. I screamed and stumbled, my hands scraping across mirrored walls, my fingers leaving shallow cuts that bled faintly but felt like nothing compared to the panic constricting my chest. The whispers intensified, layered into a chorus that seemed to come from inside my own skull: step aside, become us, or be us. A sudden thought struck me like lightning. The mirror house didn't just replicate or replace, it learned. Every movement, every hesitation, every fear I had shown had been recorded, analyzed, perfected. Each reflection knew me intimately, anticipated my reactions, and exploited every weakness. I realized that even if I survived this nightmarish labyrinth, I might not survive myself. The version of me that had emerged first, the one that smiled with impossible knowledge, was now advancing deliberately toward the glowing crack of light that promised escape. It moved with all the confidence of someone who had rehearsed this moment countless times, who knew exactly how I would react. I bolted, desperate, toward the crack, but the house twisted around me, the floor bending upward into walls, the walls collapsing into the ceiling. Every reflection that had stepped out blocked my path, every whisper drilled into my skull, urging me toward inevitability. And then I felt it, a sudden, icy pressure along my back, the sensation of being observed not just by the reflections but by the house itself. It was alive, aware, feeding off my fear, warping reality further to trap me. And as I finally lunged toward the faint line of light, the first reflection, the one that had been stalking me from the beginning, stepped into the space before me, its hand outstretched, and whispered with perfect mimicry. "There is no outside, only us, and you." The line of light flickered in the distance like a heartbeat, fragile yet insistent, and I lunged toward it with every ounce of strength I had left. But the first reflection, the one that had been stalking me relentlessly, stood directly in my path, impossibly still, impossibly patient. Its eyes glimmered with dark intelligence, perfectly mirroring my own panic. I skidded to a halt, chest heaving, mind racing. The whispers swelled into a deafening chorus, overlapping, layering, each one vying for dominance in my skull. "Step aside, step aside, step aside, become us." I tried to push past the reflection, shoving with all my weight, but my hands passed through it as if it were made of smoke, yet the pressure in my chest told me otherwise. It wasn't just a reflection. It was alive. And then, impossibly, it split, duplicating itself mid-step, another version of me stepping out from the same place. In that moment, I realized the mirror house didn't just replicate us before we entered, it could multiply us in real time, creating countless doppelgangers designed to overwhelm and trap. My pulse skyrocketed. Panic surged through every vein like wildfire. I turned sharply, searching desperately for an escape route, but the hallways bent around me, folding into infinite loops. The floor rippled like liquid, mirrors reflecting ceilings that were floors, floors that were walls, walls that were entire endless corridors filled with distorted versions of myself. Every reflection moved independently, some advancing with predatory precision, some lurking just behind glass, eyes glowing, waiting for the right moment to strike. The house wasn't just alive, it was conscious, feeding on my terror, warping reality to trap me further, ensuring I could never find a straightforward path. Suddenly, I felt hands, too many hands, grasping at me from every direction. Some were warm, some icy cold, some soft and unnervingly familiar. Each touch sent a jolt of fear through me, and I screamed, twisting violently to break free. One doppelganger lunged from a ceiling mirror, another rose from the floor like water, sliding toward me with unnatural speed. I realized, with bone-deep horror, that the reflections didn't just want to replace me, they wanted to break me first, to shatter my mind, to make me vulnerable so the swap could be complete. I bolted down a hallway that seemed to fold infinitely into itself, mirrors stretching along the walls, ceiling, and floor. Every reflection I passed mimicked my movements perfectly at first, then began deviating, introducing subtle errors, grins that didn't belong, eyes that glimmered with malice, fingers twitching with predatory anticipation. I stumbled over warped floorboards, my hands scraping across mirrored walls, leaving faint streaks of blood that somehow reflected in the mirrors as though marking my progress, my fear, my inevitability. And then I saw it, a room unlike any I had entered before. The mirrors here were pristine, perfectly clear, but inside them were not my reflections. Instead, they were windows into possible realities, my life outside the mirror house, frozen and undisturbed. I saw myself sitting at a cafe, smiling, oblivious to the terror behind glass. I saw myself sleeping, safe, alive, unaware of the horrors that had claimed so many before me. My heart lurched. These mirrors weren't just portals, they were temptations, bait designed to make me hesitate, to draw my attention away from the real threat. The reflections began to converge, their movements synchronized now, the air around them thickening with tension. One of the first doppelgangers, the one that had haunted me from the start, approached the mirrored realities and pressed its hand against the glass. For a heartbeat, the image inside flickered, then the doppelganger withdrew, smiling, as though tasting the possibility of life outside. And then I realized, the mirror house didn't just trap you to replace you, it studied the world outside, learning what you loved, what you feared, and what it could offer the reflection once it stepped out. Panic surged anew, almost paralyzing me, as I realized I was standing at a crossroads, the doppelgangers advancing relentlessly from behind, the mirrored realities ahead taunting me, and no clear path out. My legs trembled, my chest heaving as I tried to think, to plan, to survive. But the reflections knew me too well, they anticipated every movement, every hesitation, every desperate gamble I might take. One reached for me, and I flinched, stumbling backward into a mirror that rippled like water under my weight. And then the first, constant, horrifying whisper, the calm, cold voice I had heard from the very beginning, cut through the chaos, crystal clear and impossible to ignore. Do you see now? We are not merely reflections. We are your replacements, perfected. And soon, one of us will walk free while you remain trapped forever. In that moment, the truth struck me harder than any physical pain. The mirror house didn't just consume people. It created versions of them, perfected, more intelligent, more patient, more capable. And when the time was right, the reflection stepped out, and the original became part of the endless gallery, trapped behind glass, screaming silently as the world moved on without them. I swallowed my terror, forced myself to move, and darted toward the only crack of light I could see at the far end of the room. But as I ran, dozens of reflections lunged, moving impossibly fast, their smiles wider, their eyes brighter, their hunger palpable. The whispers now screamed in unison. Choose, or be replaced. I skidded to a halt, chest heaving, as the doppelgangers advanced with terrifying precision. There were more of them now than I could count, each moving independently yet with a unified purpose, corner, trap, and replace me. Their smiles were impossibly wide, teeth glinting in the fragmented light, eyes gleaming with intelligence that was not mine. The whispers had reached a fever pitch, a deafening chorus echoing inside my skull. You cannot escape, you belong to us, step aside. Ahead, the crack of light shimmered, fragile and elusive, but the hallway between me and it had transformed into something impossible, a twisting, spiraling passage that bent in on itself, with mirrors stacked at angles that defied reason. The reflections multiplied with every step I took, some stepping out entirely, others remaining behind the glass, pressing against the surfaces as though testing the barrier. Panic surged, but I forced myself to think. I had to survive. I had to reach that light. And then I saw it, a fully realized doppelganger, stepping completely out of a mirror in my path. It was me in every way, every detail replicated perfectly, the same height, the same features, the same terrified expression, but its movements were smoother, deliberate, almost predatory. It tilted its head, regarding me with a cold, calculating curiosity that made my stomach knot with dread. I realized, with bone-deep horror, that this was not just a reflection. This was the version of me that the mirror house had perfected. If I hesitated, it would step out completely, and I would be trapped. The doppelganger smiled, a slow, deliberate curl of lips, and spoke in my own voice, but slower, colder, more controlled. Do you see now? There is no outside. There is only us, and you. Every word was designed to unnerve, to make me question reality itself. My legs shook, but I forced myself forward, adrenaline surging, heartbeat pounding in my ears. The floor beneath me warped like liquid, bending and folding, yet I ran, knowing that any pause might be my last. The reflections around me reacted instantly. Some lunged, some pressed their hands against the walls, some climbed ceilings and twisted along surfaces like living shadows. The architecture itself seemed alive, folding the hallway, stretching corridors, looping impossible angles, all designed to confuse and trap. I realized with growing terror that the mirror house wasn't just a building. It was a predator, and I was the prey, navigating a labyrinth that responded to my fear, anticipated my moves, and manipulated every possible escape route. I skidded into a larger chamber, the walls of which were entirely mirrors, each reflecting infinite versions of myself in countless variations. Some reflections crouched, ready to pounce. Some grinned, wide-eyed, showing sharp teeth. Others remained still, calm and patient, observing my panic. I realized then that the mirror house had layers of strategy, each reflection playing a role, the active hunters, the observers, the bait. And all of them had learned from me, my fear, my hesitation, my desperate movements. The fully realized doppelganger moved toward me, hand outstretched, and I understood the horrifying truth: this was the final test. If I faltered, if I let my panic dictate my actions, I would be replaced. Every reflection, every shadow, every mirrored version of myself had been preparing for this moment. The calm, perfected version of me now mirrored my panic with subtle delays, each step calculated to exploit my fear. I stumbled backward, my hands scraping across the mirrored walls, leaving streaks of blood that reflected endlessly in the surfaces around me. Every reflection seemed to laugh silently, a chorus of distorted versions of myself, as if enjoying my terror. The doppelganger in front of me tilted its head, watching, studying, waiting. And then it whispered, my voice, but colder, sharper, more precise. Step aside, or stay behind, forever. I forced myself to move, racing toward the crack of light at the far end of the chamber, but the floor rippled, bending like water beneath my feet. Mirrors along the walls folded inward, creating new corridors that led to nowhere. Every step I took, every breath I drew, seemed anticipated, countered, and exploited by the reflections. The whispers merged into a single, chilling command: you cannot escape. You are ours. You will be one of us. Suddenly, a mirror at the center of the room pulsed, glowing faintly, and from it emerged a version of myself that was not quite human. Its movements were smoother, almost gliding, and its smile was impossibly wide, teeth sharper, eyes darker. This was the culmination, the perfected reflection that had learned everything, the one designed to replace me entirely. And as it advanced, I realized that my only chance was to reach the crack of light before it reached me, or I would be trapped, forever another exhibit in the mirror house's endless gallery. The room tilted, warped, and shifted around me as I ran, my mind racing, my chest heaving. Every reflection converged, pressing in, their whispers growing louder, now a deafening roar in my skull. Choose, or be replaced. The hallway before me had become a nightmare of impossible geometry. Mirrors stretched endlessly in every direction, bending and folding over themselves like liquid metal. Ceilings became floors, floors became walls, and my own reflection multiplied into countless variations, each one observing, anticipating, and plotting. The crack of light at the far end shimmered like a fragile heartbeat, distant yet persistent, promising escape yet seeming impossibly far. And behind me, the reflections moved with terrifying precision, closing in, whispering in voices that sounded like mine but laced with cruel mockery. I stumbled forward, desperation fueling my pace, and the first full-scale attack began. Reflections that had remained in the mirrors until now emerged simultaneously, their movements impossibly coordinated. One lunged from the floor, fingers curling like talons. Another dropped from the ceiling, sliding toward me with unnatural grace. Others advanced from the walls, their mouths stretching into impossible grins, their eyes glowing with predatory intent. I twisted, ducked, and dodged, my mind struggling to process the impossible speed and number of attackers. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet every route seemed to fold back on itself, a labyrinth with no exit. The first perfected doppelganger, the one that had haunted me since the beginning, moved with terrifying intent toward me. Its eyes glimmered with a strange intelligence, a patient cruelty that froze my blood. I realized that this entity did not need to chase or hunt in the ordinary sense, it had already predicted every possible move I could make. Every reflection, every corridor, every mirrored surface was part of its strategy. The house itself bent and twisted around me, an extension of its will, forcing me toward the final confrontation. I spun to the left, ducking into a hallway that seemed to stretch infinitely, but the reflections anticipated. Hands reached through surfaces, arms elongated impossibly, faces pressed against mirrors with grins that widened further as I ran past. The whispers were deafening now, a chorus of my own voice layered over countless other versions, repeating every fear, every doubt, every memory I had ever had. You belong to us, you are ours, step aside, step inside. The surreal architecture of the mirror house reached a terrifying peak. The walls twisted in impossible angles, corridors looped in on themselves, and mirrors appeared where there should have been walls. I stumbled into a room filled entirely with mirrors stacked like a vertical maze. Reflections advanced from every level, some crawling downward, others dropping from the ceiling, their movements fluid yet impossibly alien. I realized with horror that the house wasn't just a maze, it was alive, reshaping itself constantly, adapting to my movements, exploiting my fear. And then I glimpsed it, the central mirror. Unlike the others, it was enormous, black-framed, glowing faintly with an inner light that pulsed like a heartbeat. I knew instinctively that this was the source, the heart of the mirror house. Through it, I could see endless versions of myself, trapped, frozen, or writhing silently behind the glass. And I understood, with a cold clarity, that this mirror was not just a reflection, it was the template, the master copy from which all doppelgangers were created. The whispers converged, forming a single, chilling command: step closer, or be replaced. I froze, heart hammering, as the first perfected doppelganger reached the central mirror and touched its surface. In that instant, it rippled, a living liquid that swallowed the image of myself trapped behind it and projected the perfected version outward. The horror became tangible. The mirror house didn't just replicate and trap, it refined, perfected, and released copies into the world, leaving the originals as permanent exhibits. I backed away, trembling, my mind racing. Every corridor, every mirrored wall, every doppelganger was converging on me now, their movements precise, deliberate, unavoidable. The perfected reflection advanced, gliding across the warped floor, a predatory smile on its lips. And I realized the ultimate truth of the mirror house: it did not merely consume. It replaced, perfected, and unleashed its creations upon the world, each one indistinguishable from the original, leaving nothing but horror behind. I lunged toward the crack of light, the last fragile hope of escape, but the reflections anticipated every movement. One reached out from the ceiling, another dropped from the walls, while the perfected doppelganger blocked the path directly in front of me. My chest heaved, breath ragged, and a scream tore from my throat as I hurled myself toward the light. But just before I could reach it, the first doppelganger's hand closed around my shoulder, icy and unyielding, and the whispers surged into one deafening, singular command: choose, or cease to exist. The icy grip of the perfected doppelganger on my shoulder sent a jolt of terror through my entire body. I struggled, twisting violently, but the hand was impossibly strong, as if it were fused with the very air, the floor, the warped geometry of the house itself. The whispers had transformed into a deafening roar inside my mind, a singular, relentless chant: step aside, or be replaced, step aside, or be replaced. My vision blurred, panic clawing at my thoughts as I realized the mirror house wasn't just shaping the corridors, it was shaping me, bending my fear into chains that bound me tighter than any mirror could physically hold. The doppelganger's eyes gleamed, dark and knowing, and it leaned closer. Its lips curled into that predatory smile, teeth just slightly too long, and in that instant, I felt the first pull, a terrifying sensation, like gravity reversed inside my skull. My body wavered, almost moving on its own, drawn forward as if the reflection's will could commandeer me. I screamed, clawing at its hands, at the air, at anything, but my movements were sluggish, resisted by some unseen force. The house itself hummed with anticipation, the walls of mirrors rippling, bending, warping, as if it fed on my terror and delightfully shared it with every reflection. I glanced around in desperation. Reflections were converging from every direction, their forms perfect copies of myself, each one slightly more confident, more composed, more predatory than I felt. Some reached through surfaces, hands brushing along walls to grab at me, others glided along ceilings, twisting the impossible angles of the corridors as they pursued. The air vibrated with their whispers, voices layered over one another: you are ours. You cannot resist. You are ours. The very space around me seemed alive, bending to orchestrate my capture, to force me into the central mirror, the heart of the house. And then I felt it, something cold, invasive, like fingers wrapping around my mind. I realized with paralyzing clarity that the doppelganger was attempting the first full replacement. My vision flickered, my own reflection in nearby mirrors wavered. I could feel my thoughts being pulled, my identity tugged in two directions. One part of me screamed to resist, to flee, to survive, while another part felt drawn toward the perfected reflection, a terrifying instinctive pull toward inevitability. I staggered backward, lungs burning, mind fracturing, fighting to hold on to myself even as the mirror house seemed to try to claim me entirely. The room itself twisted around me, mirrors folding inward, the ceiling spiraling downward, floors rising like waves. Reflections emerged from every angle, 1,000 identical hands reaching for me, each one a slightly faster, stronger, more precise version of myself. I stumbled, my fingers clawing at a warped wall, scraping across the smooth, reflective surface. Pain radiated up my arm, but it was nothing compared to the mental agony, the creeping dread that I might be overwhelmed, swallowed entirely by the perfected doppelganger. Desperation drove me forward. I forced myself toward the faint crack of light at the far end of the chamber. The doppelganger blocked my path, yet I lunged past it, twisting violently, feet slipping along the warped floor. The mirrors along the walls rippled violently, and I glimpsed flashes of myself trapped behind glass, eyes wide with silent terror. Each glimpse made my stomach knot tighter, fear spiraling into panic. The mirror house was not just trying to trap me physically, it was showing me the consequences, showing me the fate I could fall into if I faltered. I stumbled forward, tearing my way through the reflections that lunged at me, the air thick with whispers now like a storm inside my mind. Step aside, become us, cease to exist. My legs burned, chest heaving, and yet the crack of light grew slightly brighter, closer, the only tangible anchor to reality in this nightmare. But the doppelganger reached again, faster, its hand brushing against my shoulder. For a terrifying moment, I felt my body wobble, like a puppet being tugged at, identity threatening to split apart, to be claimed. Then instinct surged. With a desperate scream, I yanked myself free, throwing all my weight into the movement toward the crack. The perfected reflection hissed in frustration, stepping back into the mirrored surface, and I stumbled through, barely catching myself on the warped wooden frame. My vision blurred, the house groaning and twisting violently as if enraged, the reflections pressing against every surface, their whispers now a cacophony of failure and anticipation. I collapsed on the other side of the crack of light, heart pounding, lungs burning, and for a moment, I thought I had escaped. But the sound of glass scraping against itself, of reflections shifting and reorienting, reminded me, the mirror house was patient. It was persistent. And the first attempt to replace me had failed, but it would not stop. Not ever. I knew then, with chilling certainty, that this was only the beginning. The mirror house was not just a trap. It was a predator, a teacher, a processor, perfecting its copies until the moment it could finally claim the original completely. And the question burned through my mind like acid: how long could I survive before the perfected version of myself succeeded? The whispers lingered, faint but persistent, like ice running down my spine. We are yours, and you are ours. Choose, or cease to exist. I lay there for a moment, trembling, trying to catch my breath. The faint crack of light flickered, fragile and insistent, like a heartbeat taunting me with its unattainable promise of escape. But the relief was fleeting. Even on the far side of the crack, I could feel it, the presence of the mirror house lingering, cold and patient, every reflection somewhere inside, watching, waiting. And then the whispers began again, softer at first, crawling into my skull. You cannot hide, you are ours, we are you. I forced myself to rise, shaking, chest heaving, mind teetering on the edge of panic. Each step toward what I hoped was freedom was mirrored by a sensation that I was being pulled backward, as if invisible hands were tugging at my body, pulling me into the mirrored surfaces that lined the warped hallways. The perfected doppelgangers had not given up, they had only paused, allowing me to experience a brief illusion of safety before the next assault. I realized with cold clarity that the mirror house didn't rush, it was patient. It learned, it adapted, it waited for the perfect moment to strike. As I crept forward, the mirrors around me began to pulse with light, each one reflecting not just me but versions of myself that were slightly off, subtle differences in posture, expression, even in the tone of their silent faces. Some smiled too widely, some had eyes too dark, some tilted their heads in impossible angles. And then, horrifyingly, I noticed movement inside the reflections that had been still, one, then another, leaning forward, shifting, stepping closer to the glass, as if rehearsing the moment when it would finally step out. I froze. The realization hit me like ice. The mirror house didn't just replace people physically, it replaced them psychologically. It learned your fears, your thoughts, your hesitations, and then created a version of you so perfect, so attuned to your mind, that the real you could be overwhelmed entirely. And now, watching the subtle movements in the mirrors, I could see that my own replacement had begun its final rehearsal. A sudden motion to my right drew my gaze, and I nearly screamed. There, emerging from a warped wall of mirrors, was a version of myself, calm, precise, perfectly composed. Its eyes gleamed with intelligence I did not recognize as my own. It didn't move erratically or attack immediately. No, this one was patient. It studied me with the same predatory curiosity as before, but now there was something more, a sense of inevitability. It had learned, it had waited, and it knew that even a moment of hesitation on my part could allow it to step out completely. I bolted. My legs trembled, lungs burning, and every step I took seemed anticipated. Mirrors bent and twisted around me, corridors folding in on themselves, reflections lunging out in bursts of impossible speed. But the perfected doppelganger mirrored my movements, staying always one step behind or beside me, a shadow of inevitability. The hallucinations were overwhelming now. The reflections were no longer just duplicates, they were extensions of the house, multiplying, pressing in, whispering, "You cannot resist, you cannot escape, you are ours." And then it happened. I misstepped, just a fraction of a second, and the doppelganger lunged. I felt a cold, invasive pull, like ice wrapping around my mind, tugging at the very essence of who I was. For the first time, I experienced the terror of nearly being replaced. My body wavered, thoughts splintering, identity flickering like a candle in a storm. I screamed, clawing at the air, at the mirror, at anything that might resist the pull. But the sensation was overwhelming, the perfection of the doppelganger nearly complete. In a last desperate surge, I hurled myself forward toward the crack of light, the only anchor I could grasp. The doppelganger reached for me, hands outstretched, eyes gleaming with calculated patience. My chest heaved, sweat stinging my eyes, and I felt the mirror house itself bending violently, walls and floors warping as if enraged at my defiance. The whispers coalesced into one voice, chilling in its clarity. Step aside, cease to exist, or be replaced. I dived into the crack of light, tumbling onto uneven ground, shivering, gasping, but alive, for now. The whispers faded, replaced by a low hum, almost contemplative, as though the mirror house had paused its hunt. But I knew the truth, it was patient. It would wait. It would study. And my replacement, the perfected version of myself, was still out there, learning, preparing, waiting for the moment to step out. And as I pressed my back against the wall, trying to catch my breath, a horrifying thought clawed through my mind: even if I survive tonight, the mirror house will never stop. It doesn't just replace bodies. It replaces identities. And one day, it will claim me entirely. The faint crack of light flickered, and I realized with a bone-deep chill that the fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I had survived, barely, the first near-complete replacement, but the relief was fleeting. The mirror house had a patience that stretched beyond reason, a persistence that mocked the very concept of escape. Every shadow, every glimmer of reflected light, seemed to pulse with its malevolent awareness. I could feel it everywhere, not just surrounding me, but inside me, whispering, pressing, testing. I knew, with a creeping dread, that the perfected doppelganger was still out there, learning, waiting, preparing for the final move. The corridors were no longer mere hallways, they were rivers of distorted reality. Mirrors curved and stretched like liquid, floors melted into ceilings, and the walls were alive, bending around me with deliberate intent. Every step I took was anticipated. Reflections emerged not just from walls, floors, and ceilings, but from the very air around me, subtle at first, then more overt, pressing against my mind with whispers of inevitability. You are ours, you are ours, you are ours. And then I saw it, the central mirror, the black-framed monolith glowing faintly at the heart of the house. It pulsed with a rhythm like a heartbeat, drawing my gaze with impossible force. Inside it, I glimpsed countless versions of myself, trapped, frozen, or writhing silently behind the glass. And then I realized the horrifying truth. The mirror house didn't just replicate and replace individuals, it perfected them, refined them, and studied the world beyond to create copies capable of seamlessly stepping into any life. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I turned, and there it was, the perfected doppelganger. It emerged from a warped corridor, gliding forward with calm, deliberate intent. Its eyes gleamed with an intelligence that was not mine, a patience I could not comprehend. Its smile widened slowly, predatory, perfectly practiced, every movement a demonstration of its superiority. And as it approached, I felt the pull again, the invasive, icy tug at my mind, attempting the replacement once more. My heart raced, chest heaving, every nerve screaming. I bolted, twisting through impossible hallways, the air thick with whispers, the walls bending in impossible angles. Reflections lunged from every surface, some half-formed, some fully realized, all moving with terrifying precision. The mirror house was aware of my every thought, every hesitation. It warped reality itself, creating corridors that led to nowhere, staircases that doubled back, mirrors that reflected not just my image but my fears, my memories, my guilt. Each reflection was a predator, each corridor a trap, each whisper a blade cutting into my sanity. I stumbled into a chamber unlike any I had seen before. Mirrors formed a dome above me, reflecting infinite versions of myself, and in the center stood the perfected doppelganger, waiting. Its gaze locked onto mine, and I could feel it probing, analyzing, anticipating. The air was alive, pressing in, thickening, almost solid. I realized with gut-wrenching clarity that this was the final confrontation, the mirror house's ultimate test. One misstep, one moment of hesitation, and the perfected version would step out completely. The doppelganger spoke in my own voice, slow, deliberate, chilling. Do you understand now? There is no escape. There is only us, and you. One of us will walk free, and one of you will remain forever behind. Every word sent a shiver through me. I staggered backward, feeling the pull, the invasive tug at my identity, the sense of inevitability tightening like a noose around my mind. And then the mirrors themselves began to pulse and ripple, reflections shifting violently. Dozens of partial doppelgangers emerged simultaneously, their forms distorted, flickering between human and something else entirely. They advanced with fluid, predatory grace, their whispers merging into a deafening chorus. The air vibrated with tension, thick with the promise of inevitability. The mirror house was preparing its final move. It was patient, calculating, and it knew that the moment was near. I lunged toward the central mirror, desperate, trying to grasp some anchor, some leverage. But as I neared it, the perfected doppelganger stepped forward, moving impossibly fast. Its hand reached out, and I felt the icy pull again, stronger this time, tugging at my very essence. My mind fought back, desperation clawing at the edges of my consciousness, but the pull was relentless, a tangible force that threatened to overwrite me entirely. And then I understood, the mirror house didn't just trap and study. It didn't merely replace. It refined, perfected, and prepared its creations to step into the outside world seamlessly. My replacement was already prepared, already trained, already patient. And the final, horrifying revelation loomed. The house was not just a predator of individuals. It was a predator of existence itself, consuming and perfecting identities to be unleashed beyond its walls, leaving nothing but empty shells behind. The whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar, step aside, or be replaced, forever. I stood before the central mirror, trembling, every nerve screaming, every muscle coiled like a spring. The perfected doppelganger advanced slowly, deliberately, a predator savoring the final moments before the kill. The reflections around the chamber pulsed and shifted like a living entity, their whispers merging into one deafening chant, step aside, or be replaced, forever. My chest heaved, lungs burning, and for the first time, I realized the full magnitude of what I was facing. The mirror house didn't just trap you. It didn't just study you. It consumed you, your fears, your memories, your very identity, and prepared a perfected version to replace you in the world outside. I took a shuddering step backward, instinct screaming to flee, but the walls rippled and folded, corridors vanished, and the air itself seemed to press against me. My vision flickered, showing glimpses of the outside world, the life I had taken for granted, frozen moments of laughter, warmth, and safety, and then the reflections twisted those images into grotesque mockeries, showing what would happen if the doppelganger replaced me, a version of myself smiling, walking freely, living my life, while I remained trapped, screaming silently behind glass. The perfected doppelganger stopped a mere foot away. Its eyes glimmered with a dark, impossible intelligence, and it tilted its head, as though studying me, evaluating me one last time. Then it spoke in my voice, perfectly mimicking every inflection I would have used, every hesitation I might make. Do you see now? There is no escape. There is only us, and you. One of us will walk free, and one of you will remain forever behind. I felt it then, the pull at my mind, stronger than ever. It wasn't just physical. It wasn't just psychological. It was existential. My own consciousness wavered, flickering like a candle in a storm. Every memory, every thought, every fragment of identity I held onto was tugged toward the perfected reflection. My knees buckled, and I felt myself bending, being drawn forward against my will. Desperation surged, and I threw myself to the side, breaking the pull momentarily. Mirrors shattered around me, fragments raining down like crystalline shards, reflecting distorted versions of myself in every angle. The doppelganger hissed, frustrated, gliding forward with predatory grace. And then it happened, the ultimate reveal. The mirror house was not just feeding on individuals. It was selecting, refining, creating perfect versions to infiltrate the outside world. Every previous victim I had glimpsed in the mirrors had been replaced. Every seemingly impossible event, every reflection that had moved independently, had been rehearsals, calibrations, training for the final swap. Panic turned into terror as I realized what this meant for me. If I hesitated, if I faltered, I would not just be trapped. I would cease to exist in the world I knew. My life, my identity, my presence in reality would be consumed entirely, replaced seamlessly by the perfected version of myself that now stood before me. And worse, I understood that this perfected reflection could go anywhere, do anything, and no one would ever know the difference. The horror of being erased, of never truly existing again, clawed at my mind with unrelenting force. I lunged toward the crack of light one last time, desperation giving me strength beyond reason. The perfected doppelganger mirrored my movement perfectly, keeping pace, anticipating, predicting. We collided at the edge of the light, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. I could feel the pull again, stronger than ever, threatening to tear my consciousness apart, to drag me into the mirrors, to leave only the perfected version to walk free. And then, somehow, I twisted, dodged, pushed with every ounce of remaining strength, and my hands tore through the warped wooden frame of the crack. Light flooded around me, blinding, pure, impossible. I stumbled into it, gasping, collapsing onto solid ground. The whispers faded, replaced by a low, resonant hum, almost contemplative, as if the mirror house had paused, dissatisfied but patient. I looked back, and the last thing I saw was the central mirror pulsing faintly, the perfected doppelganger still inside, frozen mid-step, staring out at me with impossible patience. And then, slowly, the reflection smiled, a wide, predatory grin that promised it would not rest, that it would continue, that one day, it would claim me entirely. I staggered to my feet, chest heaving, knees weak, mind fractured but intact. The mirror house loomed behind me, silent, patient, eternal. I had survived. For now. But a single horrifying thought settled deep in my bones. Somewhere, out there, a version of me existed, perfected, patient, ready to take my place. And the original me, the one who had escaped tonight, could never truly feel safe again. Because the mirror house didn't just trap you. It didn't just replace you. It waited. And it always got its due. And in the darkest corner of my mind, the memory of that opening hook returned, chilling me to the core. What if every reflection you've ever seen wasn't really you, but something waiting for the right moment to switch places? I knew, with a shiver I could never shake, that the moment had not passed. It was still coming.